Hello and welcome to Brief&Rs for Sales Leaders. We promise to be brief, bright, and bring it all to you in 19 minutes or less. Today, I'm joined by Laura Lloyd, Regional Vice President of Sales. Laura has worked with many sales professionals over the past decade, providing targeted solutions for a variety of sales training and assessment clients.
Thanks, Drea. Sales interviews are close to my heart. I am a sales professional and have sat on the other side of the table many times, and I can offer a perspective of someone who's been there and done that. This Brief&R is for busy hiring managers who want sales-specific interview questions but don't have the time to prepare and ask the right questions for an impactful interview. These questions are designed to help you clarify areas of potential weakness if the person is hired into this role.
Specifically, we're going to walk through how to align your interview questions with what the position requires for success, tips for finding out how motivated a candidate actually is by making money, ways to determine if a sales candidate will be a good fit for your sales team and culture, and lastly, specific techniques to craft interview questions that get a true response.
So often a sales candidate seems to say or do the right things in an interview or during that interview process. You hire them and naturally you expect them to lift off and start performing at high levels. We have big expectations. And unfortunately, the reality is that often this person was leading you to believe that they had what it takes to be successful in your selling environment. But then you find out it was just for show and they don't actually have what it takes to succeed.
Focus on asking questions that reveal information about these three areas: behaviors, motivators, and skills. A good pre-hire sales assessment will cover these areas.
Well, so why these three, Drea?
Great question. Behaviors matter because a candidate's behavior style is important to specific roles. Behaviors show the candidate's personality and what you see on the outside. So for example, an introvert versus an extrovert. You can see those things about a person. Someone who's more reserved is introverted. Mm-hmm. Someone who's more outgoing is typically extroverted. Their motivators are most important because either you got it or you don't. You can't manufacture it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. Finally, when we say skills, you can actually divide that into two categories: soft skills and hard skills. Soft skills are the professional polish of a person. What's below the surface, their mentality. Can they stay on task? Can they see the big picture? Do they use common sense? Are they emotionally intelligent? Mm-hmm. Hard skills can be learned. They're trainable and measurable. They measure the candidate's knowledge of what to do, how to do it, and when to do it in relation to the sales process. Now, a lot of folks want to know from us, how do I get true responses? Now, if you don't have the luxury of taking a bunch of time with the assessment and you only have interview questions at your disposal, how do you get accurate, true responses from your candidates as opposed to, well, BS, quite frankly? Mm-hmm. My first recommendation is to ask open-ended questions. And a good test of whether your question is open-ended or not is, does it begin with do or did? So do you do this? Did you do that? Is likely going to get a yes or no answer. That doesn't give you much to work with.
Right.
So the first recommendation is to ask open-ended questions. Begin your question with who, what, when, where, why, or how. And you're likely to get a truer, more detailed response that helps you see their true potential more clearly.
Mm-hmm. Gives them the opportunity to elaborate.
Exactly. And speaking of elaboration, you want to go 3 deep. Elaboration is really important. So don't take their answer on face value. Even if they do give a pretty detailed answer, listen actively. Mm-hmm. And ask a couple more questions. So for example, you can ask, who's the most convincing person you've ever known? What did that person do that made them so convincing? Then based on the candidate's answer, ask a follow-up question. How have you tried to use the same approach in convincing your prospects or customers? Then ask an additional question related to their answer. So you have to listen actively. I can't stress that enough. It sounds like, quote unquote, Mr. Scott was a very convincing salesperson, and I see why you'd want to follow his example. When you tried to use his technique with your own prospects, what happened? Or what held you back from trying his technique? So being an engaged interviewer really is what's key there.
Just digging deeper.
Exactly. Finally, ask candidates questions in areas they have likely struggled in or may experience challenges in right now based on their assessment, but with the assumption that it's a challenge area that they've worked on developing. This tends to open people up, make them feel a bit more comfortable about talking about their potential weaknesses in a sales interview. For example, if you have a candidate with a very outgoing behavior style, very charming, enthusiastic, that personality also tends to be conflict averse. Conflict aversion can lead to avoidance in the sales process in crucial areas such as asking qualifying questions, asking for the business, handling objections, etc. You can ask them, what have historically been difficult conversations for you to have with buyers in the sales process? Or tell me about the conversations you found to be most difficult for you to have in the sales process. What made them difficult? How have you overcome those difficulties to ensure you don't avoid having those crucial conversations? And then most importantly, what do you do differently now from how you used to do it? See how I went 3 deep there?
That was good. So on to this next slide, interview questions to uncover. This is about behavior style. You can gain a lot of insight into how well a candidate will perform in your unique selling environment by understanding their behavior style. You know, several people have taken the DISC assessment before to understand what those behavior styles are. And so for this interviewing technique to be effective, everybody involved in the selection process needs to come to a consensus on exactly what the sales role requires for success. That can be done through our benchmarking process, which we're going to discuss in a few minutes. Once you've agreed on what the role requires, ask questions to determine if the candidate will align well with the culture, with the team, and with the position. Here are some examples. How do you differentiate yourself personally? What's more important, being decisive or slowing down to pay attention to the detail? Have you ever had a losing streak, and how did you turn that around?
These questions, I think, are really good for getting at the heart of a candidate's approach. And that's what behavior style really tells us about is it describes a person's approach. And certain approaches are better in certain selling environments. So some selling environments do require a softer, more thoughtful and methodical approach. Some require, most, probably for those listening, require a more aggressive approach, more tenacious, bold. And these are a couple questions that can help you uncover that type of behavior style.
On to the next one, money motivation. Everybody has a unique set of motivators. It's what gets them out of bed in the morning and drives them to perform throughout the day. And when you're trying to fill an open sales position, it's very important to find someone who's highly motivated by making money and the ability to control their own income level. That's about the compensation plan. Are they commission-based? Are they willing to work for it? And sales jobs reward the drive to make money. And the more weight your sales position places on the commission, the more driven a person will need to be in this area. So use the following questions to reveal how motivated your sales candidate is by money. And look out for the red flags that indicate their drive to make money is not as high as they may want you to think.
Let's discuss what a good answer and a bad answer would look like relative to some of these questions. So the first one here, what are your long-term career aspirations? That's a pretty standard question. What you're looking for here is this person a rock star or a superstar? Those are two terms I like to use. Rock star implies somebody who wants to stay in their role and do what they do forever.
Right.
That sales rep that is motivated by incentives and they just love being out there developing business. They're not interested in advancing.
Right.
Or having more responsibility and not being out in the field anymore. So you want to understand that about your sales rep and go in with that type of mentality. I need to understand, is this a rock star or a superstar? And what do I need in this role?
And what are we looking for long term?
Exactly. How has your compensation been structured in the past or at your most recent employer? This one is my favorite question, actually, and you don't have to get into the nuts and bolts of specific numbers here. This is not what we're asking for, and you may want to clarify that for the candidate. You don't have to tell me specifically the numbers, but if you were going to put a ratio on commission versus salary, what would that look like? Was it a 70-30 split? That kind of thing. It will help you understand and compare apples to apples, their past compensation versus what you plan to offer them. then you might want to even ask them what their ideal ratio looks like for them.
Mhm.
They might have something in mind where they prefer more weight on salary. Then you can, again, compare apples to apples, whether that's the environment that's ideal for that person. And how have you achieved year-over-year growth in your accounts and in your territory with new business development? Then we get into the nuts and bolts of, do they prefer developing new business, or are they the type that tends to cultivate existing business? So hunters versus farmers. This helps you get to the essentials of that particular distinction between sales roles.
And it is so important that the job rewards what motivates your candidate.
That's the most important, in fact, we consider. I mean, motivation covers a multitude of sins, is like the way I like to put it. So even if you're an introvert in a more extroverted selling environment, that can be overcome if it's worth it to you. But what makes it worth it to you? That's what we're always trying to find out.
Okay. And we're moving on now to interview questions to uncover personal skills.
Personal skills are not dependent on experience. A lot of people think, the older you get, the more polished you are, the more mature you are, and therefore, the better the decisions you will make. And that may be true for a lot of people, but I've seen a lot of assessments out there that say otherwise.
I've seen my share as well.
Yeah, of very young people with with limited experience that actually are very mentally clear and focused, and a lot of older people who lack clarity. So personal skills help you understand your candidate's mental clarity and focus, as well as their ability to discern what's important in any given situation. Bottom line, can they connect the dots? This is the stuff that surfaces about 6 weeks after they moved into the role. Personal skills are the things you can't quite put your finger on in the interview, but there's something not quite right about this
just
person.
Doesn't settle.
Yeah. And the personal skills assessment makes it very clear that which is typically very vague. Here are a couple of questions to use when trying to uncover cognitive weaknesses: emotional intelligence, results orientation, strategic thinking ability, things like that.
Okay.
So what role does sales team alignment play with the rest of the organization and the overall success of the team? That's really important to understand a person's ability to see the bigger picture. How do all the parts come together to create the whole? Can they think across dimensions and not just about results, but also about the people involved and about the resources available, et cetera?
Okay. Describe a time you lost a longer-term customer. What happened and how did you handle it?
That's an emotional intelligence question.
How do you stay organized? What are some examples of how you stay on top of high gain activities? I like this one.
Yeah, Laura's all about that. And it can be very difficult for a lot of people. It's hard to get and stay focused. And that's something that we measure to ensure that that person can stay on task.
And who are some of your hardest customers you've tried to sell to, and what made them so difficult and challenging?
The last one here, tell me about a time you responded poorly to stress. So in this case, you can assume that they're not perfect, right? And you just ask that a time you responded poorly to stress, what happened and how have you gone about ensuring it doesn't happen again in the future? So you're assuming development there.
All right. So now we're moving on to selling skills ability. Selling skills can be taught and refined, but ideally, you'll want to bring people onto your sales team who are already proficient in the basic sales acumen. Use the interview process to gauge how well a candidate understands the strategies necessary to successfully move a prospect through each stage of the selling process. It's important to keep in mind that not all selling skills will translate easily from one industry or selling environment to another. Your first step should be to gain a deep understanding of what skills are important for the job you're trying to fill, and then tailor your interview questions to drill down into those areas. So let's look at the following questions to answer, can this person sell? First question, walk me through your sales process of choice.
Yeah, where do they start? What's their typical starting point? And don't let them just give a rote answer or a basic answer. Again, you want to go 3 deep there and drill down and find out in more detail how they go about selling.
And how would you start working a territory from scratch? kind of thinking that plan through. Walk me through your process for developing a prospecting plan. What is your process for determining if a prospect is qualified, qualifying the opportunity? And where specifically do you need to grow your sales skill set? That is, are they aware that they do need some further development? And lastly, how do you handle situations when a prospective buyer insists that you cut price? How are they going to stand up to the challenge? How are they going to create that value? All right. So a good hiring decision is objective and it's based on data, not just a gut feeling. Oftentimes in an interview, you get that gut, you think it's a gut feeling and it's a good candidate, but, here are some recommendations things to look at.
When evaluating candidates for hire, we encourage our clients to apply equal weight to 4 key variables in the decision, or what we call the 4 R's. The first one, rapport. This is where the answers to the interview questions you ask come in. Will he or she be a fit with your company and the team's culture? How will they come across to others they'll need to work with closely? Mm-hmm. So, do they show up to game day, really, in the interview? Then the report. At the Brooks Group, we use an assessment system called TriMetrics, which allows our clients to identify exactly what a position needs for success and then compare applicants to those established benchmarks. It's a scientific method for determining with great accuracy if the job seeker is a match for the role. The next one is their resume, of course. The resume could tell you about how the person thinks of him or herself, as well as an outline of basic qualifications in skills and experience. And of course, that's important foundational element. And finally, references. So no one is intentionally going to give you a reference they know is a bad one. Mm-hmm. That's why we recommend at a minimum checking dates and places of employment to ensure the candidate did in fact work where they said they worked, when they say they worked there. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I've seen candidates falsify their resumes.
That's sad but true. Well, by evaluating a candidate in each of these 4 areas, you're much more likely to choose someone who will be a good fit. Having well thought out interview questions will set you up going into the hiring process, but keep in mind that what we've just covered are generic sales interview questions. The more that you can tailor them to specific skill requirements of the position you're trying to fill, the more you'll be able to drill down and really determine if the candidate is a good fit for your company. So let's assume you've gone through a telephone interview, they have qualifications you're looking for, and ideally you've done a sales pre-hire assessment. So you're pretty far down the path and feel like they're a strong candidate, good in the running, but now comes the time or opportunity to ask interview questions that probe potential weaknesses. So when we talk about weaknesses, what does that mean? It means getting clear about the challenges that specific candidate is likely to experience in your selling environment and your organizational culture. So we have a couple of minutes here. We're going to move on to a brief overview of the TriMetrics job benchmark. So as we mentioned, for those listeners who already used TriMetrics assessments, you're probably familiar with them. The beauty of the benchmark is that it allows you to determine exactly what a position requires for long-term success and then compare your job candidates to that blueprint. We're very excited because we recently added a custom interview guide with every job benchmark that's created. You can see before an interview where a candidate might not line up completely with the job requirements. And within this guide, you'll be given custom questions that allow you to really drill down into those areas. It's like having an expert hiring consultant walk you through your interview process, but in a much more convenient, cost-effective way because it's all right there for you in your personalized guide. So along with the recording of this briefinar, we will be sending you a little bit more information about the interview guide and how you can obtain your copy. So I think that unfortunately, we are at our 19-minute mark and we don't have time for questions at this point. I will be happy to respond to all of the emails that we receive with the questions personally, but we wanted to thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much and happy interviewing.